What's going on, guys? It's Zach here. Bring you guys another fantasy football video. Hopefully, you guys had a good week 13. Hopefully, you guys are getting yourselves all set for the playoffs. We've got 1 week left in most people's fantasy football regular seasons, so hopefully, you guys have either locked up those playoff spots or at least still in it. I know a lot of us are really fighting for those last playoff spots, and obviously, this is going to be a big waiver wire week because a lot of us, there's still buys happening. We got the Cardinals and Commanders on bye this next week, so people are still going to need to find starters. We had a lot of injuries this last week, so a lot to go over there as well. And it's going to be a busy week for sure. And obviously, maybe you're set for the playoffs, but you want to position yourself for having some players that are going to peak for that playoff run. So a lot of players to talk about here. It should be a good week. I'll apologize, my voice is a little off probably. I've got a bit of a stuffed up nose, but feeling fine otherwise, so don't worry about it. Just got to power through here. But yeah, it should be a good week. Hopefully we get you guys all set, and I'll just go position by position here and do my best to get you guys set going forward. So yeah, with that being said, let's just get into it. No sense in beating around the bush here. So starting things off with the quarterback position, I really just want to highlight Jordan Love. He's been playing extremely well lately. He just put up a really great performance, beating the Kansas City Chiefs. He looks the part. He's playing really well, and he's got really talented skill position players around him. I talked about him last week as a guy that I really did think was turning the corner, is just in terms of his ability to play NFL quarterback, and I think he's a legitimate player. He's got good position players. Obviously, he offers some mobility on the ground as well. So I think Jordan Love's like a low end quarterback one the rest of the way. I sort of brought up the stat last week that he's got more points or more games with over 20 fantasy points this season than Patrick Mahomes. He had a game like that this week. Patrick Mahomes didn't, so he continues to outperform even Patrick Mahomes in the season. So he's a good option. I think you can pick him up and just play him in pretty much any matchup going forward. Obviously, he's not going to be a league-winning kind of guy, but he's a good player. He's going to be involved enough, and they're actually airing it out quite a bit. So I think you can use him for sure. After that, I'll mention Jameis Winston. They got a decent matchup against the Carolina Panthers this week. Derek Carr got banged up. I just get the feeling that this is going to be the injury that actually sidelines Derek Carr for some time. They said it was a concussion protocol, rib and shoulder injury. Got hit really hard. I'd be shocked if he plays this week. We know Jameis Winston can put up numbers, although it's not exactly the most delicate form of football. It's obviously super fun to watch. He can put up numbers for sure. So if you're in a pinch, I think you could start Jameis Winston. Russell Wilson, I'll mention him. Got a good matchup this week against the Los Angeles Chargers, who really are just falling apart this season. Obviously, the Broncos sort of ended their 5-game winning streak this last week against the Texans, but Russ still played all right. The 3 interceptions weren't great, but 2 of them were, one was just at the end of the game trying to force something in there to get the win. The other one was a tip pass, and then one was really great play by the defender. So it's not like he played poorly. He still ran the ball effectively, had a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. Russ is playing well. This defense is going to give up some points to the Chargers next week, so I think you can play Russ for sure. Joshua Dobbs, I'll mention. Got a good matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. I know Dobbs has been mentioned as a potential guy that could get benched for the team. I don't really see that happening. We'll see what happens. So I wouldn't spend any sort of significant fab on Dobbs, but he's a guy that obviously has been good for most of the season so far. Offers you a rushing floor. He's going to be on waivers in a lot of leagues, having gone on by this last week. So I think you could pick him up and use him. And then Matthew Stafford, playing really well lately. Just continues to get it done. This is a team that I know Puka's banged up and Cooper Kupp is banged up, but Stafford's playing really well. The Rams are in the playoff hunt, and I think Stafford's going to be like one of those like low-end streaming end quarterbacks the rest of the way. So if you want to pick him up and play matchups with him, I think that's a good idea here. Next, we've got the big list here, and that's going to be the running back position. I'll start things off with Chuba Hubbard, who just continues to get it done. Scored 2 touchdowns this last week, was the clear lead running back in Carolina. They obviously shifted coaching staff this last week, and it didn't change their usage in the running back position. If anything, it shifted it even more heavily towards Chuba. So I think Chuba is honestly like a low-end running back too the rest of the way. Obviously, this Panthers offense is not great at all, but Chuba's being utilized like a lead running back. He's a good player. He honestly looks really good this season. So if you need a starter for the rest of the way, I think Chuba can actually be a low-end option for you guys, and I think he's on plenty of waiver wire, so I just wanted to mention him for sure. Next, we'll talk about Ezekiel Elliott. This is where we're getting into those injuries that happened this week. We saw Ramondre Stevenson go down with what they're calling a high ankle sprain. Probably going to miss some time. I'd be shocked, honestly, if we see Ramondre even the rest of the season. That's going to make Zeke like the low-end running back too, similar to Chuba the rest of the way. Obviously, he's going to get pretty much all the work in this Patriots backfield. We know Zeke's a capable pass catcher. They'll use him near the goal line. Not that they have a whole lot of goal line opportunities, but Zeke's a good player. It's not what he used to be, but he's a guy that you can pick up and play and just be usable the rest of the way. So no problem just picking up and using Ezekiel Elliott the rest of the way. Tajay Spears, I'll mention him. They are saying that Derrick Henry is actually not in concussion protocol anymore, which is really strange because he left the game with what they were calling a concussion yesterday. So not really sure what's going to happen there, but we'll see what happens in terms of Derrick Henry's status for Monday night's game this week against the Dolphins. If Derrick Henry were to miss, Tajay Spears would be a guy who's going to see 20-plus touches, and obviously not a great offense, but they utilize him out of the backfield as a pass catcher. He's a guy that you could play as like honestly a top 20 running back this week if Derrick Henry were to miss. Keaton Mitchell, I'll mention him. He could be on waivers just because the Ravens were on bye this last week. I mentioned him last week as well, but it sort of seemed like there was a shift in the Ravens' backfield last week when they played on primetime. He's a player that obviously is really efficient and really effective when given the opportunity. And if we see his snaps increase, we could see him be a really high-end performer, sort of like a Devon Achane light going forward. So I think if Keaton Mitchell's on waivers, I think he's definitely worth picking up, especially if you don't need to start this week. So I'm still not confident in rolling him out there at this point, but I think there is a world that exists where Keaton Mitchell ends up being really useful. I'll mention Antonio Gibson as well. Brian Robinson left this game this week with a hamstring injury. The Commanders are going on bye, so keep that in mind if you do need a running back to play this week. Obviously, Antonio Gibson's not your guy. But what I mentioned there is that there's obviously an opportunity here with a hamstring injury. It could linger. We could see Brian Robinson miss more time. So that would make Antonio Gibson the guy that you could pick up. And he'd be utilized in a featured running back position. They obviously are going to use him out of the backfield. Chris Rodriguez, if you're in a super deep league, could be an ad as well because he will get some touches out of the backfield as a ball carrier. But Antonio Gibson would be a mostly featured back, and we've seen him succeed in that role before. So Gibson's a really nice ad for me, especially if you don't need to start this week. A less nice ad, but I just have to mention him, is going to be DJ Dallas. We saw Zach Charbonnet exit last week with an injury. There is a chance that we go into this week without Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet against the 49ers. Obviously not super exciting to play in a third string running back against the 49ers, but if you're dealing with injuries, if you really need to start, DJ Dallas should see 10 to 15 touches this week in the event that both those guys are out. So you could pick him up and play him, but I really hope you don't need to do it because I'm not excited about that at all. Kenneth Gainwell, I want to mention him. He's one of the premier handcuffs in the NFL right now. He's got a really great playoff schedule. I've talked about DeAndre Swift being a potential league winner this season, and we saw DeAndre Swift take a really brutal hit at the end of the game yesterday. Didn't take him out of the game, but obviously there's a situation that could happen where DeAndre Swift misses time, and if that were to happen, Kenneth Gainwell would be the immediate backup and would be a rock star for the fantasy playoffs. So he's a guy that I definitely want on my roster if I have the roster spot available. Elijah Mitchell, same thing. He's a fantasy rock star if Christian McCaffrey goes down. Same thing can be said for Rico Dowdle. Then I want to touch on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We've seen the last couple weeks where Jerick McKinnon's been out, so it's just been Pacheco and Hilaire. Pacheco got banged around a lot yesterday. Obviously took some really tough hits. Never took him out of the game, but he also threw a punch with his left hand. Got ejected for that game. There's obviously a chance that we could see some sort of suspension for throwing a punch. I don't know if there's any lingering injuries as well, but if Pacheco were to miss time, Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be a featured running back on a really good offense, or at least what's supposed to be a really good offense. So he'd be a guy that's worth adding in like a super deep league. And then Michael Carter, I want to mention him as well. He's getting basically the third down work in Arizona behind James Conner. We saw Amari DeMarcado leave the game with concussion. The Cardinals are on bye this week, so this isn't like an ad for week 14, but we could see a situation where the Cardinals want to use the younger running back in Michael Carter. They're obviously out of things this season. James Conner's role has been a little bit iffy so far this season, and with their losing and getting blown out, we don't see a whole lot of James Conner. So this is a situation where if Michael Carter were to be in a situation where James Conner gets hurt or something, I think Carter could be a really useful ad. So if you're in a super deep league and don't need a player for this week, I think Carter's at least worth a glance here. Next up, I want to talk about the wide receiver position. I'll start things off with the two Packers, Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed. We saw Christian Watson leave the game with a hamstring injury, which is a huge bummer because that breakout for Christian Watson was really starting to happen this week. So that's obviously super disappointing. But both Doubs and Jayden Reed are very capable pass catchers. I talked at the start of this video about how Jordan Love really is just convincing me, at least, that he's a legit quarterback. Both these receivers and Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed are good players, and they're going to be guys that I think you can use as like a wide receiver 3 going forward. So they're on waivers in a lot of leagues. I don't think they should be. I think they're definitely high priority ads here. Noah Brown, I got to mention him. Obviously a huge bummer seeing Tank Dell leave the game with a fractured fibula, going to miss the rest of the season. That's obviously going to put Noah Brown in what was a feature role that he was really excelling in for a couple weeks before going down with an injury himself. Not a great matchup this week. They play the New York Jets, so really tough matchup for wide receivers. I'm not super excited about that this week, but I think Noah Brown's got a shot to be a really useful player for the fantasy playoffs for you guys, so he should be added for sure. Robert Woods in super deep leagues could be a target as well, but not nearly as excited about him. Elijah Moore, I've got to mention him. He had 12 targets this last week. He seems to sort of have a bit of a connection with Joe Flacco. Obviously only caught 4 passes, so it wasn't fantastic, but he is the number 1 wide receiver in the offense if Amari Cooper is missing time. Amari Cooper left the game with concussion, so we could see more Elijah Moore going forward. Joe Flacco looked pretty good as well, so I think Elijah Moore is a guy that if Amari Cooper were to miss time, you could see Elijah Moore being a really useful like wide receiver 3. Curtis Samuel, got to mention him. Obviously, they're going on bye this week, but Curtis Samuel continues to be arguably the wide receiver 1 in the offense. They're manufacturing touches for him. Terry McLaurin had 0 catches this last week. I think Curtis Samuel is obviously the safest play of any wide receiver in Washington, which is super disappointing, but you can pick him up and use him, and he's going to put you up like flex wide receiver 3 level numbers, so I think he's got to be mentioned for sure. Jonathan Mingo is basically operating as the number one wide receiver in Carolina at this point. They're sort of phasing Adam Thielen out. Mingo still doesn't look good to me. I haven't seen anything out of him that's impressed me from like an actual talent standpoint, but the usage is there. He's probably the best wide receiver the Panthers have at this point if Adam Thielen's sort of starting to get aged out here. And if that's the case, I think Mingo's a guy that should be rostered. He's put up double-digit fantasy points in PPR formats the last 2 weeks. I think you can pick him up and play him if you're in a desperate situation. It's not a bad matchup this week against the Saints. Demario Douglas obviously missed his last game with a concussion. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him miss this week as well against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but after that, he could easily be the number one wide receiver for the Patriots. He's a guy that, especially if you don't need to start this week, I think he's like a low-end flex option if you need him. Jalen Hyatt coming off of the best game of his career 2 weeks ago. Obviously, he was on bye this last week, but there's a situation here where we could see that like late season breakout for the rookie. He's a talented player. There's also talk of Tyrod Taylor coming back off of IR, so we could see this Giants offense get a little bit better. Jalen Hyatt's got that. It could be at least a nice dart throw if you have the extra roster spot. Jameson Williams seems to look more and more involved for this Lions offense. Still not like a reliable user. Doesn't have reliable usage in the offense. Obviously, there's so much usage for Laporta, Amon-Ra, and the two running backs. So it's really tough to get enough volume for Jameson Williams, but he's an explosive player. We saw him score again this week. So he's a guy you could pick up and hope for some increased usage. Maybe there's an injury in the Detroit backfield or something that opens up targets going around. So just a thought. I don't think James Williams is someone that, unless there's an injury there, that I'd be confident in starting, but he does look like he's getting better. And then Khalil Shakir clearly established himself as the slot wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. They play the Kansas City Chiefs this week. That should be a high-scoring game, so if you need a flex just like desperately for this week, I think you could technically do worse than Khalil Shakir, and then on top of that, he's the number 3 wide receiver at a good offense, so he could certainly be, you could do worse if you needed him for sure. Next up, we got the tight end position. Just a couple quick hitters. I'll mention Chig Okonkwo. He's actually just played really effectively the last couple weeks. He just looks a lot better on the field. I personally have always been a believer in the talent. Just the usage hasn't really been there, but they're trying to manufacture touches for him a bit more. They play the Miami Dolphins this week, who are not bad against tight ends, but obviously the Titans are going to need to score. We could see Derrick Henry be banged up in this one. That could mean they have to lean on the passing game a little bit more, and then their schedule gets better going forward. They have 2 games against the Texans and 1 game against the Seahawks for the fantasy playoffs. I think if you're streaming the position, you could do worse than Chig Okonkwo this week. Isaiah Likely, I've got to mention him. We saw him put up 4 for 40 2 weeks ago. Should be filling that Mark Andrews role. I think he's a talented player. He's a very different player than Mark Andrews, but he should see targets in this offense. I think you could do a lot worse than Likely. Gerald Everett sort of seems to be emerging as like the best number 2 option that Justin Herbert can really lean on. He caught 4 of 5 targets this week, scored a touchdown 2 weeks ago. They've got a good matchup for tight ends against the Broncos this week, so I think Gerald Everett's actually a good streaming option this week if you need him. And then Brevin Jordan obviously didn't do a whole lot this week, caught 3 passes for 64 yards. That's not bad for a tight end. And then they've got a decent matchup again this week. You could do worse. We could, however, see Dalton Schultz come back from injury, but also there's going to be more targets opened up in this offense with Tank Dell going down. So Jordan, I think he's a talented enough player. If Dalton Schultz continues to miss time, you could see Brevin Jordan be useful if you need a really desperate streaming option this week. And then last, I just wanted to highlight some commonly available defenses that I think people should be adding, not just for now, but also for the rest of the season, because it is that point in the year where maybe you should have been looking at this earlier, and I've talked about this in some of the videos early on this season about defenses to be targeting for the playoffs, but if you haven't done that yet, here's some options that I just wanted to go over. Start things off with the Colts. They've been really great over the last several weeks, and they've got really great matchups going forward as well against Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, and the Raiders. All 4 of those matchups are fantastic for the Colts. I think the Colts could easily be a top 5 fantasy defense the rest of the way, and they're honestly on way too many waiver wires, so go add them if they're available. They could easily be a really rock solid option for you guys. After that, the Texans, they get the Jets and the Titans, and then the Browns and then the Titans. So 3 really great matchups for them. Obviously, the Browns look a little bit better. The Titans always play tough, but those are 4 straight matchups that don't really scare you. You saw the Houston Texans create some turnovers this last week. Their pass rush looked really great. We're seeing Derek Stingley come into his own in the secondary. They've got good players there. I think there's a potential opportunity here for the Texans defense to get a lot better going forward. So I think they're a really solid option. If you just need to play this week, the Patriots, who have actually given up the least points in the NFL over the last 4 weeks, they play the Pittsburgh Steelers this week with Mitch Trubisky at the helm. The Patriots, their offense is awful, but their defense is not bad. It's a really great matchup. So if you want to play either defense in the Thursday night game this week, you could definitely do that. And the Saints, the next 2 matchups are really great. They get Carolina this week and then the Giants the following. So the Saints could get you through the next 2 weeks as well. So that'll do it for this week's waiver wire video. Up next, I'll do some last-minute trade targets as well. Obviously, it'll probably be a bit of a shorter video. We're at the point in the season where most of you guys have had your trade deadlines already happen, but hopefully some of you guys still haven't. So I'll still get some trade targets out there for you guys just so you have something to look forward to, and hopefully get you guys poised for which players should be a trending up and all that for the fantasy playoffs. So hopefully this gets you all set. If you have extra fab and you really need a spot, make sure to spend it this week. Obviously, you can't take it with you going into the next season, so you want to have a little bit of fab just for like a little bit of maneuverability come the playoffs. But if you really need a spot, there's no point in waiting up on that. So just get what you got to do this week. Make sure you're in your spots. Get yourselves into the playoffs, then ride from there. So really wishing you guys a lot of luck this week. If you guys want to make sure you get access to the trade video, Thursday night primer, start sit video Saturday morning, and then the Sunday's live stream, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We got to get like 30 more subscribers to hit my goal of 1,000 by the end of the season. So I think we can get there. I really appreciate all of you guys. It's been a hell of a lot of fun this season. Just going to keep rolling with you guys. So really appreciate all you guys, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.